What's up, guys? Welcome back to our Fish the Moment live stream. Great to see everyone already in the stream commenting. Awesome to always see people talking about fishing and getting excited about the streams. Before we get started, though, I want to ask all the new people who are here watching my videos for the first time to actually go check out my YouTube page down below, clicking my channel icon. This video is actually my fishing live stream where I break down Navions and Google Earth maps with my subscribers and my Patreon members for an hour. And it's a lot of content, and for newer fishermen or people who are just getting exposed to my channel, it may be information overload. So go to my channel and check out some of my other videos that are a little bit shorter, than maybe 10 to 15 minutes long. We'll have on the water footage. I'll show myself actually fishing on the lake, things like that, that will be a little bit easier to consume than these long form videos. But if you're here for the live stream, then welcome, and really excited to continue to talk to you guys about all these different great lakes my Patreon members have submitted this week. And just so you all know, the lakes for today's show are Pickwick Lake in Alabama, Clarks Hill Lake in Georgia, and Lake Eufaula in Oklahoma. And you can check those out over on the side of the screen, the right side, and you'll kind of get the general timestamps when I get to those lakes. It's not always perfect, but I'll try to follow that as best I can. And for everyone who's wondering how those lakes are picked, they're picked from my Patreon members, which is a service or a website that I actually take monthly subscriptions on, where people can vote on video ideas, vote on lakes for this live stream, and also get a lot of extra perks. So definitely go check out my Patreon page, again linked over there in the bottom right corner. And other than that, really great to see everyone. Let's see what everyone has to say over here before we jump in. We got JT, we got John. John, I already saw your comment. He says he better talk about fishing the darn funky bass. And says, in my area, bass are all on the beds but won't bite a thing. So we can definitely talk about that spawning funk, John. The fish in my area are also in a similar situation. And so good to see everyone else, though. We got Thomas, we got Bass Accountant, Bobby Bass, Roger, Caleb, Mike, Bill. Good to see everyone as normal. And JT's already going at it in the comments. Let's see who else we got. We got Josh, David, Mike. Good to see everybody. So what I want to do today, guys, is just jump straight into the lakes. I don't have too much to talk about before we jump into videos. I do want to let you know that I'm going to be posting more videos coming pretty soon. I've been working on trying to get a lot of other stuff organized for my channel and for my website and just different stuff. So haven't had as much of a chance to edit, but hopefully I'll be able to get a video out by Thursday or Friday this week, and you'll probably like it a lot. It's a pretty cool video idea. So other than that, let's jump straight into the first lake, which is Pickwick Lake in Alabama. Okay, let me get this logo off the screen. 1 second, guys. There we go. So first up is Pickwick Lake in Florence, Alabama. And Pickwick is a really famous fishery. It's on the Tennessee River, and it's known for offshore ledge fishing and giant bass that you can catch in 15 to 30 feet of water on offshore ledges. Guys fish giant 10-inch flutter spoons. They fish giant swim baits and deep diving crankbaits, tricking 10XDs, stuff like that on these ledges all the time. Catch giant bass. But today what I want to talk about is how to find fish on these really good Tennessee River ledge lakes when the fish aren't out on the ledges and they're actually up in the shallows spawning. And so I've actually fished tournaments on Pickwick Lake before, and I fished a college national championship out here, and I caught some really good fish on a lot of different ledges, and also back in some of the backwaters. I was there in May, so it was kind of a transition period in that post-spawn period. And one thing I kind of learned about fishing Pickwick is that the fish pretty much stay offshore almost year-round out here. And so it's one of those deals where maybe there's a week or two period where these shallow water bays are a little bit better than this main lake, but a lot of times this main lake area and on the main river is going to be good pretty much year-round. And so you can normally find some fish that are either moving back out to the ledges right after they spawn, like in the middle to end of April. You can also find fish moving into spawn and staging on some of these in-between areas I'll talk about as well in early April and even into the mid-April time as well. So you can pretty much fish offshore on Pickwick year-round and still do really well. That's how a lot of tournaments are won. But basically, what the areas that I really want to focus on are some of these areas up on the midsection of the lake around here, around Bear Creek, I believe it's called. And so this area of the lake is really good. Or maybe it's not Bear Creek. What is this creek called? Whatever this big creek is called, I'm not really sure. I'm not a Pickwick Lake expert, but anyways, this area of the lake I really like because it has a lot of good ledges, it has a lot of good backwater areas as well. And then the other area is down here in this section of the lake, which has some really good spawning areas by Buck Island. And then also talk about fishing by the dam and fishing around the current and how those fish act. And so I'm gonna switch over to Google Earth really quick to break down first the dam area, then this backwater area, and then finally end up at the top of the lake where we can talk a little bit more about the offshore fishing. So let me switch over to Google Earth really quick. Okay, so here's Google Earth. By the way, guys, I'm going to be getting into your comments for sure. And basically, what you can do to get me to respond to your comment is just put @FishTheMoment in your comment and put a bunch of question marks behind your question, and I'll be able to answer pretty much everyone's comments hopefully by the end of the stream. And if not, I'll catch you at the very end of the stream and I'll go through every single comment and talk through. Looks like I got a little light return today. Only 77 people watching. I don't know if it was a busy day or if people are just not liking my content anymore. Hopefully that's not the case. But I didn't, maybe need to announce this a little bit better. One thing I did do on my website, guys, is put up an events calendar of when this live stream is. And so hopefully that will help out people finding the stream. But other than that, basically what you see here is Pickwick Lake from a Google Earth view. Let me get some of this stuff out of here. And if we go over here, this is the dam where right here, Wheeler Lake, or no, this is Wilson Lake. Wilson Lake pumps into Pickwick Lake. And as you can see, there's a lot of current that gets pushed down through this dam. And this is a really popular area in Pickwick Lake. And this is actually one of the areas where a lot of guys catch their fish when they fish tournaments on Pickwick Lake. And there was actually a couple tournaments in years past where Cliff Pace and a few other guys were catching them in the Bassmaster Elite Series events below this dam when the bass were spawning. And basically what happens is that these fish, a lot of fish will just sit in this current pretty much year round. And underneath the water here, there's giant rocks. Like if we take a look over here, it basically looks like this right here, but it's underneath the water and it has current going on the top of it. And basically what guys do is there'll be like 25 boats that just stack up here this time of year. And they're looking for places where the bass can get behind current seams, so places where big rocks are, like this rock here, or even this rock here, where that rock will deflect the current and the fish will sit right behind these giant rocks and boulders, or maybe even sink down to the depressions right in here, and they'll wait for the shad and stuff to get pushed around by the current over the top of these little holes, and they'll jump out and grab that bait. And what guys try to do is basically just make casts with a 1/2 ounce and a 3/4 ounce swim baits. They'll throw jigs, they'll throw 1 ounce spinner baits, stuff like that, trying to bring their baits down along these rocks, but not the rocks here. The rocks that it looks identical to this, but it's under the water here. And they're just looking for big largemouth and smallmouth that are going to be setting up in this current. And it's a great place to go catch 15 to 30 fish a day if your trolling motor battery can hold up. And then the other thing that's interesting is that a lot of the smallmouth and largemouth will also spawn over in this area. And so if you look in Pickwick Lake right here, the dam is pushing out a ton of water, and this area up here is completely protected from that current, and there's no current around here, and that makes it a lot easier for these bass to spawn. So what these bass will do is they'll sit here pretty much year-round in this current, then when they want to move up to spawn, they'll just push up onto this giant flat. And if we switch over to Navionics really quick, I can show you what that looks like. Give me 1 second here. So got 94 people on. Some people are at least showing up now. So this is what this big area looks like, and it's basically just a giant flat. And these fish will spawn down here, especially the smallmouth, because the water is pretty clear on this end. They'll spawn out here in 5-6 feet of water out in the middle of this big flat, and guys will basically just cast their jigs or tubes or shaky heads and all kinds of stuff, drop shots on this flat. And again, this flat looks just like the area that was over here. It's just full of boulders and rocks, and those fish will spawn in and around those rocks in like kind of places where you get maybe some pea gravel as opposed to the big rocks, stuff like that. And these guys will just kind of idle around, and they'll look for, if we go back over to the Google Earth, we're going to be switching a lot back and forth here, guys, so bear with me on that one because we're probably doing a lot of jumping. But if you look here, you can see these areas in here where you have this really thick rock, and then in here you can see it gets a little bit more flat, and there's not as much of that big chunk rock like in these areas right in here. So you have the big chunk rock, then you have the flatter areas back in here where there's not as much of a chunk rock. Those are the areas that those bass are going to spawn, and they're basically, what you can do is just graph over these areas and look for these places where there's not as much rock, and that's where those fish are going to spawn, up in this big flat around here. And also spawn like back up in here. They'll spawn anywhere where they can get away from that current. And again, they live here pretty much all year out in this current, and then they move around the corner and they will spawn back up in this shallow flat with no current. So other place I would check out if I was going to Pickwick Lake is I would run to the midsection of this lake, and I would actually run up into this creek back up in here. And this is where Kevin Short actually won a Bassmaster Elite Series event at Pickwick Lake a few years back. And if you look at this place, you can see one, the large, super shallow. I have the lake drawn down a little bit, but if we go back in time, we can find some times when the lake is more full, though none of these images are really doing this backwater really any credit. We're showing it, there you go. You can see this is where it normally is if you're at like full pool. What guys would do is they would run all the way back into here, and they would find bass spawning. And if you look at this lake, you can see it's really muddy up in here. So this is like really muddy, dirty water. But as you get further back in these creeks, it actually starts to clear up a little bit. And what these fish would do is they'll sit in the spring and they'll spawn on the edges of these flats, like this in here, on these big cypress trees. And they'll also spawn up in these pockets and like on these trees out here, or all the way back up in here. They'll spawn all around these trees, back up in these areas, back in here where it's a foot, 2-3 foot of water. And then in the pre-spawn and the post-spawn, they'll get in the deeper water. There's a deep like ditch basically that runs all the way back here, or a creek. And these fish will sit up in this creek. And what's happening is that Kevin Short was catching fish on a square-bill crankbait, and he was fishing around the bases of these cypress trees. And he would catch some fish back up in these areas where it was really flat, and you'd also catch some fish out here. So these are the spawning fish, and these are the post-spawn fish, and he was catching both in this little creek. And it's really a really unique area. It's not a there's not really that much area like it around the lake other than this little stretch. It's a really popular area, though. It's a big community hole. And so big things that I would do if I came into an area like this is I would really focus on places where you have that creek running really close to some of these trees. So like you can see this creek is right here, and there's these trees in very flat water. These are going to be some really good trees to target. And you can find that again by going to Google Earth, downloading the Google Earth Pro app from online basically. Just type in Google Earth Pro on your computer, download the app, and then you can actually scroll back time. And actually Google Earth Pro, this is the standard map here, but you can scroll back time if you want to go back even further in time by clicking that little clock with the arrow going to the left. I'm sure a lot of you guys know this already because I talk about literally every video, it seems like, but you can scroll back time and find these old images. But places I would really focus on again are where this creek comes in close to this flat. So these trees in here are going to be really good. Really flat water next to the steeper water. Also trees like right in here, like this tree is going to be great. It's right on the edge of that steeper water, close to the shallow water. You know, sometimes these trees out here in the center are not going to be as good unless you maybe have a cold front or something along those lines. Where in here, when the fish are moving up to spawn or get in that pre-spawn mode, they'll get right on the edge where that creek is and where the flat is, and they'll get on those cypress trees. And it's something I do in Arkansas a lot, so something that I'm pretty familiar with doing. There's a lot of cypress trees and stumpy lakes in Arkansas. Another thing you can do is you can also go back in these little backwaters back in here. These all have water in them, and so if you're out here on this area, you can run back into these backwaters and find fish spawning all up and down back in here. Especially when the water's up, you can find bass spawning all the way back in here, back into the very back of this, especially when the water's up. And again, it's protected from the main river. That's why these fish like to spawn in here. They can also just kind of sit out here on the main river pretty much year round, getting that current, feed up on all the bait. Then when they want to spawn, they just hop in right here, run to the back of this creek, spawn all up in here, and then they'll move right back out and get to the main lake. And so that's kind of the second deal that I would do if I was fishing Pickwick Lake this time of year. And then the third thing is I would actually get out on some of the shallower ledges on this lake. And I know I'm running close on time here. And I haven't got to the spawning funk stuff yet, John. I will get to that, no worries. Let's see here. Gonna click. Sorry about that. I was going through some comments. I'm gonna click here and go to Navionics. So the last thing I would look for is up here in this part of Pickwick Lake. I would look for some of the shallower ledges that are close to some of these spawning areas, but are just out in the mouth of a lot of these spawning areas, looking for bass that are transitioning from their spawning grounds out to the main lake, just from like they're getting in their post-spawn patterns. They're done spawning here, they're moving out, and they're going to get on the main lake, or looking for fish that are moving from the main lake back into these spawning areas. And really what I'm looking for are places like this high spot right here, which is in 7 feet of water, as a road bed running by it, and a creek bend that runs right across it. And as you can see, these areas in here are pretty flat and shallow, and the bass can spawn all up and down these banks. And what these fish will do is they'll set up on these high spots, like this high spot right here, or maybe this little bit steeper little drop that comes in right here. You can see a creek winds in just like this. Here's a nice kind of steep drop. It's not actually that steep. This is a lot more steep here, but it's steep relative to like this water over here. This is the steepest bank. When you look at these contour lines, they're really spread apart, and these contour lines are very spread apart. This drop right here, even though the contour lines are not super close together, they look steeper than the surrounding area. Plus, you can see that creek with the little like dotted line will swing right up against this area. And what will happen is that there's going to be shell beds that get created by current washing over these areas constantly. And shell beds will accumulate on these type of points, or up on these high spots up here, or even as you come into here, you might find off the tip of this little point right here, in 7 to 10 feet of water, you'll find these little areas where the shells will accumulate. And the reason that the fish will get here is twofold. One, like I mentioned earlier, it's a really great staging area for the fish to move to right before they move up to spawn, or it's a great place for them to stop after they spawn before they move back out to the main river ledge. And if you're talking Pickwick Lake ledge fishing, this is what we're talking about. It's basically the place where the 50 foot of water meets the 20 foot of water right here. And you can see basically that black line. And this is a ledge right here. And these fish will set up in, 18 to 20 feet of water up on top of this ledge and lipless ledge. And then they'll, sometimes sit out here in the 40 foot of water in the summer. But when they feed, they'll pull up on top of this ledge. And so basically what these fish will do is, what they'll try to do is they'll set up by places where you see these little creeks intersecting a ledge. So you can see there's a couple little contour lines, or a couple of dotted lines right here that indicate a creek. So that creek will intersect that main river ledge, and then they'll follow this main river ledge back into here. They'll spawn, and they'll move right back out. And as they're moving in or moving out, they'll stop on places like this ledge or this high spot, and even like this point right here. And so it's just a perfect area. And the second thing is that these fish will actually feed here, because what happens is the shad will actually spawn on some of these areas as well. So if you look at this spot right here, this high spot, it's 5 feet of water, which is plenty shallow enough for those bass, especially if the water's low a little bit. Those shad will actually spawn up on top of these areas offshore, and they need to be in maybe 2 to 5 feet of water for those shad to spawn. But those shad will spawn all over the hard spots and the shell beds and stuff as well, and then those bass will come up and just crush those shad. They're spawning on those type of areas. So 2 reasons why those fish are there. One, there's the bait, plus second, it's just a good intermediate stopping point where you have a little bit deeper water right here. You see 10 feet close to the shallow water where it's a foot. It's also in between the really deep 20 to 30 foot of water over here. So hopefully that all makes sense. I know I'm kind of flying through this stuff, but hopefully y'all are picking that up. I'm not seeing too many people on tonight. Do you think it was just because I probably need to make an announcement on Instagram and YouTube? Let me know what y'all think, though. If you think the content's still good. I want to know that I'm still doing the right thing because I feel like I'm potentially losing people here a little bit, but hopefully that's definitely not the case. Let's see here, bunch of people. Thanks, JT, by the way, for responding to a bunch of comments for me. Brad Dunn says Table Rock is on fire. I need to head up there. I'm not too far from Table Rock. Where you guys catch them on? They're pre-spawn, or I'm assuming they're pre-spawn. Maybe the spawn. Beaver Lake was pretty tough this last weekend. A lot of fish to be caught, but the weights were pretty low. But I guess that's just Beaver Lake in general. Let's see here. Got Flash the Moment from JT. JT, I don't know if you saw me last weekend, but I had my Flash Gordon shirt on. Today I got my Graffin shirt, my sonar shirt. You can pick this up at bassattitude.com. It's not my shirt, it's someone else's shirt I bought, but Bass Attitude has some cool shirts, so go check them out. They gave me the shirt at the Bassmaster Classic, and so I thought it was a pretty cool shirt, and so they got that to me. Tyler's Real Fishing, what's up, man? Good to see you. So anyways, let's jump to the next lake. Next up we have Clark's Hill, and this will be a great opportunity to answer John's question from earlier in the stream about how to target those bass there in that spawning funk. So let's jump over there really fast. Here we go, Clark's Hill Reservoir. So Clark's Hill Reservoir, this is a reservoir in Georgia. It's kind of sandwiched at the bottom. I wouldn't say sandwiched. It's actually at the bottom of like Richard B. Russell, and then we have Hartwell up here. And then Keowee, lakes you may have heard about. You have Lake Murray just over to the east. So a lot of lakes that people may have heard of in the past from the Bassmasters or things like that. And Clark's Hill, again, is a really famous fishery. The Bassmasters have fished there for years. It's a really good place to fish, and it's one of the blue herring reservoirs that are in Georgia. And basically, blue herring are a type of bait fish that live in these Georgia reservoirs, and they dominate the bass's forage on these lakes. And so basically what happens with those blueback herring is that a bass will prioritize eating a blueback herring over literally anything else. And so what happens is that these bass will migrate with those herring all around the lake. And the one thing about Clark's Hill that's really interesting is that it's also kind of part of like a river system, kind of like Beaver Lake and the lakes on the White River. And these fish are very temperamental to the weather on these deep, clear lakes, as well as the lake conditions. And so what I want to talk about a little bit is, one, how to deal with those fish in the spawning funk, but also how to deal with fish on these deep, clear impoundments where you have fluctuating water levels, where you have different water temperatures around the lake because there's different water clarities, plus you have the different weather conditions that will affect these bass. So to get into it first, I'm going to kind of focus on talking about Clark's Hill bass movement rather than getting into specific areas, because really once you understand how these bass move throughout these areas, it's a lot easier to figure all this out. So I'll talk about behavior, and then I'll touch a tiny bit on the areas. And again, the wrench that gets thrown in there is the blueback herring, because that's something that really will, again, basically influence exactly what the bass are going to be doing. So, in general, on these deep, clear reservoirs, the first thing you really want to pay attention to is the weather conditions, because that has a huge impact on these fish. And so, first up, when you have a deep, clear reservoir like a Clark's Hill, the really big one of the biggest factors is having wind and having cloud cover. Whenever you have wind and you have cloud cover, it's going to get these fish more active. And so if we pull into like a random creek in here and we see some, it's pretty obvious to see where some of these fish will set up. So we have, let me go out here towards the main lake. So if we look like right here, we have a nice steep pocket that comes in right here. You have some deeper drops off the end where a creek channel swings in, and you have some deeper water here out on the main lake. And so, even right over here, you have a nice steep point where contour lines come really tight. All areas where these fish will set up. And what happens a lot of times is that these bass on these deep, clear reservoirs are going to spend a lot of their time pretty much just suspended out here off the bank, and they're going to be sitting in 15 to 30 feet of water, especially on parts of the lake where you have really good water visibility. Let's say 10 feet or maybe 5 to 10 feet of water visibility. Maybe even 3.5 to 4 feet is good enough. And whenever you have like 3 to 10 foot of water visibility, these bass will sit out here over the deeper water the majority of their life. The only exceptions to that are when the bass actually move back in these pockets to spawn, which is what's going on right now. And so before the spawn and after the spawn, these bass are going to be setting up over this deeper water. And there's only really a few factors that get those fish to actually push up shallow and start to feed. And the first is if you get wind. And what happens with the wind is the wind's going to push a lot of current past some of these steeper points or into these pockets like this steeper pocket right here. And that wind will push in there. It'll stir up the plankton, which will get the bait fish to move up shallower and start feeding. And then the bass are going to follow them and feed. And I was actually on Beaver Lake last weekend, which is a very similar looking lake to this, though it doesn't have blueback herring. And I noticed that a lot of the bait fish was suspended out here in 12 to 13 feet of water. And basically, the fish were really tough to catch because we had slick, calm conditions. There was sun, it was really calm, and it was like 70 degrees outside. And the water temperature was actually 58, 59 degrees. So the fish were getting ready to move up to spawn, but it was actually really cold a few weeks prior. And so the water temperature warmed up from 50 to 59 degrees in a week. So the fish hadn't quite moved up to spawn yet. And so they were still kind of sitting out here more towards the main lake or on some of these, secondary points. And the bait fish hadn't really moved. They were all sitting here around these creek channels on some of these steeper little ditches and drains or creek channel swings. And the bass again were sitting off the bank with the shad in about 12 to 15 feet of water. And I tried to catch those fish on an Alabama rig, on a Ned rig, on spy bait, stuff like that, because I was seeing them all over my graph. But I couldn't really get those fish to bite. And I was having some success fishing some of these steeper points like this with a flat-side crankbait. And I probably caught about 25 bass doing that. But what happened is that when I was catching those fish, they were all male bass. They're all really small. And the male bass were basically moving up to spawn, and they were moving up to make their beds in these creeks. And because that water temperature warmed up so quickly in just a week, the male bass basically moved up really quickly. And in that week, they were getting prepared to move to the flat banks and these flat pockets to make the beds. But because the water warmed up so quickly, those bass the bigger female bass, hadn't quite moved up to the bank. And so they were sitting out here in the middle of these pockets, in the middle of these ditches, things like that, because there was no wind and there was no clouds. It was just bright sun, and that would cause those fish to suspend. But then halfway through the day, a big front came through. It wasn't a cold front, it was just a front where we had cloud cover, wind, and rain. And right when that front started to run through, the bass just started to erupt, and they were biting everywhere, and they were biting on these main lake points, and all those fish that I was seeing on my graph in 15 feet of water off the bank, they were underneath my boat in 15 feet of water. All those fish pushed up to some of these banks in these pockets onto these steep points. And I started catching some bigger fish, some 2.5, 3 pound bass off of some of these steeper points. And so that's what can happen a lot of times when you get those wind in those cloudy conditions. Again, it will stir up the plankton, the shad or the blueback herring in this case will move up and start feeding, and the bass will follow. So that's just one of the conditions that will impact these bass on these deep, clear reservoirs, the wind. So first up, the wind will get those fish to position and get them to feed. And it's not impossible to get those fish to bite in those slick, calm conditions in the summertime and in the fall and in the winter. It's just in this pre-spawn period, those fish can get in that pre-spawn funk like they talked about, where they're not really wanting to move up to spawn, and they don't want to be really deep chasing shad. They kind of want to stay close to their spawning areas, and they really are, wanting to feed up when it's easy for them because they want to conserve as much energy as they can before they move up to spawn, because they're going to be spawning for 2-3 weeks. And so unless you get the perfect conditions with the wind and the rain, a lot of times it's hard to get those pre-spawn bass to bite. But when you get those good conditions, or if you can find a point that's like out here on the main lake where the wind is a little bit stronger, like let's say you have a nice east wind that's pushing into a point like this, sometimes you can roll up on some of these points that have wind blowing on them, fish a jerk bait, a swim bait, a crankbait, and catch some good fish. And so that's the first thing that'll impact these fish. The second thing is the water level and how much current they're pulling from the dam. So a lot of lakes around the country right now are experiencing flooded conditions where there's a ton of water pushing through these lakes. And so what's happening is that the lake levels are high, 2, 3, 4 feet high, and the Corps of Engineers are pulling that water down. And so, like on Beaver Lake, for example, they pulled the lake down like 3 feet over the last 2 weeks. And what that did is actually pulled some of the fish out of these creeks. And what normally happens when they pull a lot of water on these deep, clear reservoirs and on a lot of lakes as well is that current will flow through this lake as they pull it down. And that will basically suck the bait fish out of the creeks. And not many people really talk about that, but basically what will happen is these shad will get sucked out of these creeks out here to the main lake, and the bass will follow. And so a lot of times when a lake is dropping quickly, like falling 2 to 3 feet in a couple weeks, and the dam is generating a ton of current, those fish will pull out of these pockets, and they'll pull out here towards the main lake. And the other thing that strong current does, it also spreads out the bait fish. And so if you're fishing, let's say in practice for a tournament, and you're not getting, or you're catching a ton of fish, you're catching like, 4, 5, 6 good keeper-sized bass in practice, fishing in the back half of a creek or fishing maybe in the front third of a creek even, and then come tournament day, you find that you're not catching any fish in these areas. The fish has disappeared. Well, a couple things could happen. One, you may have the conditions change where there's no longer wind or cloud cover that's stirring up these banks, or the lake could be getting drawn down, and those fish actually pull off those areas and get more towards the main lake than they were when you were catching them back in the creeks a couple days before that. So those are a couple factors that definitely impact these fish. And with the spawning funk and things like that, the last thing that can affect it is the water temperature. And so I mentioned in one of my videos I made about how water temperatures vary from the top half of the lake, which I consider the dirty part of the lake, where you have the dirtier, shallower water. Like up here on Clark's Hill, you can see the water is a little bit more flat. It's not as deep throughout. It's still pretty deep, but it's not super deep, and it'll be a little bit dirtier. And we can actually switch over to Google Earth to show you that. Transition this over here. Go to Clark's Hill. Give me 1 second, guys, while this flows over here. So here you go. You have some really dirty water up on the top end of this lake. And so what happens is you have this dirty water up here. This is going to warm up quicker because the water's shallower and it's dirtier. And then the water on the lower end of the lake, where it's more clear, you can see it's a lot more dark blue. This will warm up faster. Or warm up slower, I mean. And so water temperatures on the lower end of the lake here might be 55, 56 degrees right now, and water temperatures all the way up here could be 62, 63 degrees sometimes, especially if you have really warm days. They're warming it up. And on Beaver Lake, I was finding 60-degree water up on the top end of Beaver Lake, and then on the bottom end of the lake, the water temperatures were still 55 degrees, and those bass were still more in that full pre-spawn mode. So that can also affect those fish. And the last thing with that falling water in the spawn is that as that water's falling and it's pulling away from the bank, those bass aren't going to want to move up and spawn, because what happens is they'll spawn on these banks and they'll lay their eggs. And what happens is that the water's dropping and those fish are going to pull off the bank because they don't want to lay their eggs somewhere that's going to be dry land in 2 days. And so the fish will get in this weird funk, like holding pattern on some of these lakes where it's like, hey, we don't want to move up to spawn yet, but we want to spawn, and we're not wanting to, feed up for the pre-spawn. We've already fed up. We're already big and fat. We just want to get our spawn going, but the lake's falling and the current's ripping through the lake, and so I'm not going to move up to spawn yet. So all those different conditions, again, you can also talk about cold front conditions, whether you get cold fronts come through that can push fish off the bank. There's so many different factors, but all these factors can impact these super deep, clear lakes because there's so many varying conditions that can happen on them. So hopefully that all kind of made sense. And so now that I've talked about fish behavior for like 15 minutes and not mentioned anything about Clark's Hill Lake specifically, what I want to talk about really quick, I'm going to go back over to Google Earth, is talk about, actually I'll look at, I'm at Navionics, but I'll look at Google Earth for a second here. I want to talk about some areas that might be good on this lake, starting in the pre-spawn and the post-spawn. And basically in the pre-spawn, really all you have to do is just look for some of those steeper banks. Like if we come in through here, this is an old image of the lake. You can see these steeper little cuts that come in. Here's that steeper point that we talked about. You can see the bank is a little bit less exposed as opposed to this bank here that's really flat. I made tons of videos on pre-spawn areas and what to look for. Also fishing like this ditch that comes in here. These ditches are really good. Looks like there's some grass in here, though I don't know if there's grass anymore. I doubt that there's grass in there. So those are good pre-spawn areas. I've beat that to death on my channel recently. But the other areas on Clark's Hill that are really good are these offshore humps in the center of these creeks, like this hump right here. And you can find these humps by just going onto Google Earth, going back in time and looking for these humps. Or you can go to your Navionics. So if we switch back over here, you can actually find similar places, similar humps. We scroll in using your Navionics. So if we look, here's that hump right there. It says 23 feet of water, which is really deep. That lake must be really down if I can see a hump. It's 23 feet deep. Maybe I'm on the wrong hump. But anyways, you can see that this is a hump right here. And I do have videos on understanding all these different types of structures on my channel. It's like the complete guide to contour line maps. So check that out if you don't know what all these structures are. But basically what happens is these humps and things like that are great places for the bass to ambush the blueback herring that are going to be moving through this lake. And basically what happens is in the spawn, the bass will move back in the creeks to spawn, plus the blueback herring will move back onto these shallow banks in these pockets to spawn as well. And the herring will spawn in mid-April to mid-May, and they'll spawn up here shallow, and they'll start moving back out. And kind of like I talked about with the shad spawn in Pickwick, these blueback herring will spawn on these flatter points. They'll spawn on these type of points like right here where you have a really flat point that sticks out. And what a lot of guys do on Clark's Hill is they'll literally just come to one section of a lake and they'll just run every single flat, shallow point they can find. So here's a nice flat, shallow point right here. They'll fish that for like 5 minutes. They'll pull up over here. They'll fish this shallow point that sticks out right here for like 5 minutes, and they'll fish them with topwater baits. They'll fish them with jerk baits. They'll fish them with swim baits, another shallow point right here, or even like these type of points. And what they're looking for is looking for those shad to be spawning first thing in the morning. And those shad like to spawn first thing when there's low light conditions, and the herring will be spawning up all these points pretty much, I guess, like in the middle of the night all the way through when the sun basically comes out. These bass or the shad and the blueback herring will spawn up on these flat, shallow points, and you can find bass just gorging on them as they're trying to spawn. And you can catch them on topwater baits, on jerk baits, on soft plastic jerk baits, all kinds of stuff, all up on these points. And really, what happens is you have to find a good point. And a lot of times it's hard to figure out, okay, which point has herring on it. Well, all you really have to do is just run up to the point, and you'll see the herring skipping on the surface, the bass busting. And if you run up and make 5 or 6 casts, you'll know if it's happening, because you'll pull up on this point, you'll make 5 or 6, 7 casts across this point. If there's no bites, literally run over here and try to hit the next point as quickly as possible. And then run over here, find the next flat point. Maybe it's across this creek, this point right here. Let's run to this point, check this, and check this. 5 casts, motor up. Right here. 5 casts, motor up. And run all around this lake until you hit a point like, oh, here we go. This point has some really good herring activity. Those bass will crush them on those points. And after that, they'll start pulling off the bank, moving out here to some of these steeper areas, these steeper ditches, or these steeper drops out here, and you can catch them on drop shots and jigs, and even like on these humps, you can catch them out here on some of these humps on like a big, I think like the rubber strand jigs. I know that Davey Height won a Bassmaster event fishing some of these shallower humps. They were like only up in like 5-6 feet of water, but he was fishing down the sides. Like if you look right here, there's like a 6-foot hump, and he was catching fish up here that we're doing. They're on the shad spawn up in the 3, 4, 5 feet of water on top of this hump in the morning, and then he would slow down and fish a jig around this hump down in the 15 to 25 feet of water and pick off those bass that basically just chill around this hump waiting for those shad to start spawning again first thing in the morning. So ton of information there. There is a lot more I could talk about there, but I'm seeing so many comments. Let's see here. Okay, I need to get to all these comments. There's so much to talk about, but and so many comments to get to. I'll definitely get through everyone's comments at the end of the stream. I am running right on schedule right now, so I will get through everyone's comments right at the end, and I'll just sit for 15 minutes and read through all the comments and make sure I get to everyone's questions. But last thing I want to do is get to Lake Eufaula in Oklahoma, because I found the juice on Lake Eufaula, like seriously the juice. So I'm super excited to show you guys that. So never fished Lake Eufaula, but I'm excited to talk about it. It's actually pretty close to where I live too. So here's Lake Eufaula, and this is in Oklahoma. There's also a Lake Eufaula in Alabama. Don't get confused. Lake Eufaula in Alabama is where the FLW Tour fishes, and I thought they were the same lake for the longest time, but they're definitely not. But there was some Bassmaster Elite Series, or the Bassmaster Tour events. It was before the Elite Series, and I think either Edwin Evers or no, maybe Denny Brower won a tournament here like 2003 or 2004 5 or something like that. I don't know. That was when I was like 8, 9 years old, so I can't remember every tournament that I've ever watched from 15 years ago. But anyways, the Lake Eufaula is a good lake. It's, tournament caliber fishery, and it's really close to kind of some of the lakes you might see me fishing. I live up in Northwest Arkansas, up in this area, and so it's not too far away from lakes I fished before. Like, you may have seen me do a video on Kerr Reservoir, and I fished this place quite a bit. It's really, really good fishery. 10 Killer Ferry Lake is right here, Fort Gibson, so really good lakes in this area. Eufaula is kind of the biggest lake around, and the thing about Eufaula is it fishes very similar from what I remember and what I've seen on YouTube videos and stuff prepping for this live stream. Fishes very similar to a lot of these other Oklahoma lakes in this region. And then when I say that, it basically means that the fish live shallow and stay shallow pretty much year round, and they'll live in dirt shallow water. And so I'm going to switch over to Google Earth really quick and show you guys something. So let me fly over to Eufaula. So Lake Eufaula is pretty dirty. It's pretty shallow, like a lot of these eastern Oklahoma reservoirs. If you look, you can see down by the dam, which feeds into Kerr Reservoir, you can see that the water is kind of clear. It's maybe 2 to 3 foot of visibility. But then as you move back up into the creeks, it is really muddy. Especially as you move up the river, it gets super shallow and super muddy. And basically, you're going to be fishing shallow almost year-round on Lake Eufaula. There may be a few times you could catch them in the summertime offshore. There may be a few offshore spots there in like 6 to 10 feet of water by a creek channel that may hold some fish, but most of the year they're going to be up shallow. And when I'm fishing these lakes like Lake Eufaula, there's really 2 deals that I focus on. And the first is I'm looking for shallow grass, because shallow grass is always good on these Oklahoma reservoirs. And the second thing I'm looking for is rock. And both of them kind of go hand in hand. And so if we go to Lake Eufaula here and we kind of go back in time. Oh, thank you so much, Bruce, for the $20 super chat. Want to support your time. Thank you so much. Really appreciate that. As always, Bruce, always a great supporter of the channel. So Lake Eufaula here, as you can see, we kind of just scroll down the banks, you can see there's a lot of flat, kind of sandy banks, and then all of a sudden you get these really sharp, steep chunk rock banks, and it kind of goes in and out all around, where you get this mixture of riprap, chunk rock, and these flat, shallow banks. And when I'm fishing on Lake Eufaula or lakes like this in Oklahoma, like I said, I want to look for either grass or rock. And so one thing I wanted to talk about is right over here. So remind me to come back, or I'll have to remind myself to come back here because I saw something juicy. But anyways, let me zoom ahead a little bit and find a time when this lake is actually at full pool. So one thing I'm looking for is, especially on the lower end of a lot of these lakes when the water's up, you can find pockets like this pocket up here I saw earlier, where you can find shallow grass back up in these pockets. And you can see right here there's shoreline grass all up and down these creeks. So back in the back here you can see there's some shoreline grass. As you move up in these pockets, you can again see this shoreline grass. And shoreline grass is going to be an amazing place for bass to spawn in the springtime. It's also good in the post-spawn, and also is good in the fall. And basically, what you can do on these Oklahoma lakes is run around and find pockets where there's a lot of grass, and you can also run into pockets where there's literally no grass. And so if we look in this creek, you can see there is literally grass like everywhere down through here. And it's really hard to pick which grass stretch to fish because there's grass down all these banks. But then as we run back across the way, you'll notice that there's barely any grass down these banks other than maybe this little pocket has some grass. You go in here, no grass really at all, and then more grass back in this back of this pocket, and it's a lot more isolated. And so what I try to do when I'm fishing these lakes is because a lot of the lakes in Oklahoma look the same and the fish live up shallow, I look for those irregularities. And so big keys is I would run into a pocket and I would say, okay, I want to find a pocket first off that doesn't have much grass in it. And so like this pocket in here barely has any grass down any of these shorelines. But then I come over to this point right here, and boom, there's a good little chunk of grass in here and in this little stretch. And so I know that if the fish are in the grass, they're going to be feeding up shallow in that grass in the pre-spawn and the post-spawn. They're going to be setting up in these areas, and I can pretty much eliminate a lot of this other water. And so that's pretty obvious, pretty easy. Just fish down the grass, fish it with a swim jig, with a frog, with a spinner bait, and you'll be good to go. The other thing I'm looking for is, you see I have this thing right here marked rock. And if we take this back where the lake is a little bit further, a little bit lower, you can see right here that there's some really good rock veins that stick out off this bank. So you have a little rock pile right here, you have some rocks sticking out here, and another rocky vein sticking out here. And if you take the water back up, you'll notice you can barely see that rock. You can see it pretty well. It's not like invisible, but it's not as easy to see, and especially if you look over here, you can kind of see this rock patch out here, but it's more obvious when you take the water down. And what I'm looking for here is I'm looking for areas where you find these rocks on banks where there's literally no rock. So if you look down this bank, there's no rock, no rock, no rock. All of a sudden, boom, we get a boat ramp with a little bit of chunk rock here. I would definitely be hitting this boat ramp and this chunk rock with a crankbait and with a biffle bug, like a wobble head. And I would basically just target all of the places where I see isolated rock patches on flat banks. And like I mentioned earlier, you can go just like down the lake over here. You can find stretches where there's rock literally everywhere. I find a couple stretches, like right in here. You can see there's rock all over the place. And these type of banks can be good, and you might be able to catch some fish on like the rock transitions, where it transitions from this like sand or clay to the rock. But there's so many of them. I mean, rock transition, rock transition, rock transition. There's like every 10 feet, and that's not really helpful to me because it's like these fish could get on any single one of those rock transitions down this bank. So instead, I run up into some of these pockets where I don't see as much rock, like this creek right in here, and I haven't looked at this one, but let's look through here, scroll through. I'm sure we'll find something interesting back in this pocket. Now you're just exploring with me right now. I'm just kind of looking. So, like right here, what is this right here? I have no idea what this is. But this is like a random rock patch. It could be like a house foundation or something. I have no idea what this is. But look, this is literally the only rocky shoreline in this whole area, and it's sticking out here in the middle, and there's also a big tree sticking out here, standing timber. That's the type of area when the lake comes back up. This is underwater almost, and these, it might be in 2-3 foot of water, but that's perfect for these Oklahoma bass to set up on. And again, catching them on crankbaits or even like a buzz bait over the top of these areas. And these are the type of areas that you can find they're a little bit sneakier. And there's a lot of guys that'll just beat the bank, just fish down the shoreline, and they're never going to look for this type of stuff. But if you can find it, especially if you're on a lake that's heavily pressured, finding these sneaky offshore areas that are away from the bank, but they're definitely still shallow enough, you can catch some big fish. By the way, thanks so much, Keith the Trucker. Thanks for your last live stream. I had my area picked and made a long run to get to fish in river pockets. We've never done that, but remember the last live stream. Thank you so much. Appreciate that. Thanks, Keith. Thank you for the super chat. Really appreciate that. So if we go over here, back down here, this is what I want to talk about a little bit earlier, was an area that I saw that was super juicy. Can you see it? Oh, yeah, you can barely see this. So if you look right here, there's actually an old house foundation right here, and you could barely see that. But that right there is an old house foundation, and that is the juice out on the Eufaula or something like that. Because right here, the bank pretty much all looks the same. I mean, it kind of starts to transition into some flatter, banks with some sand, but there's still a bunch of rock out here. But then randomly down the bank, off the shore, you have a house foundation. And these are places that are good on a lot of different lakes. And if you take the lake back up, you'll never see that thing, but you use Google Earth, you can find that little house foundation right there. And again, fishing a crankbait or a biffle bug or something down that can be awesome. And, if we continue this theme, run into a creek, look for places where those rocks. Again, I can kind of beating a dead horse here a little bit, but even like looking for places like this, there are irregularities where you have a little creek or a ditch that winds in here, and there's a little bit deeper water down this stretch, and you can see there's actually a hard rock ridge that runs down this. So this is all harder rock. All the rest of this is sand. Cranking this right here can be really good on places like Eufaula, where you can literally just crush them. And so those are the type of spots to look for. Boat ramps, again, are always going to be good, especially down these flat banks without much rock cover. And then you can also look for places like here where you have these offshore stumps, stump, down this bank. There's not really much of that around the rest of this area. I'm just literally just picking up stuff at random, guys, going down these banks. But these little stumpy areas can be really good off the shore. Again, crankbaits, biffle bugs, stuff like that. So that's how I would handle Lake Eufaula, and those are kind of the two deals I'd be looking for. First, I would try to fish the grass if I can find some good grass, because I love fishing shallow, flooded grass with a swim jig with a frog. Then other than that, I would look for some of those sneakier areas off the bank that you can find with Google Earth. And what you can do, I've talked about this in one of my videos. I have a video on this on my channel. What you can actually do is go over here, scroll down to, let's say, this house foundation, and you can drop a pin like this. And actually, my little screen is hidden. I don't know if you can't actually see that. That's interesting. It's not showing up on my live stream. But anyways, you can drop a pin. You can name this like foundation, and then hit OK. And then you can actually transfer this waypoint from Google Earth to your fish finder, your Humminbird, Garmin, or Lowrance, or Raymarine, whatever you want. And you can actually save these waypoints then, and it's an awesome way to then upload these waypoints onto your GPS and then come back and fish them. And I have a complete guide to doing that on my channel. It is a video that I did about 2 months ago, a month and a half ago, where it's like my top 3 Google Earth tricks or something like that. Check out that video. It'll tell you how to do that. Super useful. So that is how I would handle Lake Eufaula. Very straightforward, very simple. Fish up shallow, fish in that shallow grass. The only other thing is that like now the fish are probably moving up to start spawning. And if I was going to be fishing for spawning fish on Eufaula, the places I would run is actually way up into these top parts of this lake. And I would actually run up into this area. I really love this area. And this actually looks like very similar to a lot of the areas where the guys were catching them in North Carolina on Everett B. Jordan and Falls Lake. And they were catching them on these shallow flats with creeks winding into them. And if we take the lake down, you can see there's a ton of really good little creeks and things that wind into these flats. And these fish will move back up into these giant flats following these creek channels, and they'll spawn all up in here. And these are areas that you can just come in and just crush them in. And you can also catch them on like in these ditches right here or in these gaps, fishing like a chatterbait, fishing some of these lay down trees with a crankbait, and the pre-spawn and the post-spawn. So this area is a really good looking area. Just find the areas where you have steeper water close to shallow water. So like right here, you can see there's a little bit of deeper like pond here, and there's actually an old like road or something that comes through here. And those fish will spawn right up on this type of stuff in 2-3 foot of water, and then they can pull out here into deeper water, and you'll be good to go. Or just like in these trees, you can just fish the bushes and stuff and catch fish. Or then, I mean, in the spawn, a lot of times it's just getting down, fishing down the bank. Not super interesting in my opinion, so I don't talk about it too much, just because it's like you can, run into a flat pocket that's protected from the wind, like back in here, and just start fishing down the bank. Blind flipping, in this case, a lot of times. One place you can really do well on these type of lakes are on riprap banks, specifically the last 15 50 yards of a riprap bank where it starts to flatten out. On this part of a riprap bank, like right here, it's very, very steep, and you might have 20, 30 foot of water off the bank. But there's so many lakes around the country where I've come in and I've fished the last 50 feet or 50 yards even of riprap where it starts to shallow up, and these bass will spawn like crazy down these flat stretches of riprap. And what I'm thinking is happening is that the bass will spawn, or the bass will live on this riprap year round, and then they'll just move down the riprap and the pre-spawn chasing shad, and they'll move over here, and they just want to spawn on the flattest part of the riprap they can find. And then once they're done spawning, they move right back out over to this bridge. This is a pretty big bridge, so maybe they don't move that far, but maybe they just spawn on like this little section right here, and then they'll move over here in summer and then sit here in the spawn. So few other areas to check out, at least. Hopefully that all kind of makes sense. But that's what I would do on Lake Eufaula. So now what I'm going to do is go and answer a ton of questions you guys have been posting. And I will be posting this live stream to my channel right after the video finishes or the stream finishes. So you guys can come back, and if you have to jump, you can go hang out with your family or take care of other stuff and come back and listen to the Q&A after that. But we'll try to get through everyone's questions to the best of my ability. So let me go back up to the very top because there's so much going on. Okay, back to the top. I'm just going to turn my head. I'm just going to take a drink of water real quick because this is talking for an hour. Deep part. Okay, there we go. So let's answer some questions. So I know you guys love watching me drink water, but let's see here. Thomas says, skunked the last 2 trips on Kentucky Lake. Sucks. Kentucky Lake is a challenging fishery, especially with now all those Asian carps. It used to be like one of the best fisheries ever, but now all those Asian carps are in there. That's got to just suck. I know that the lake has been really bad because of all those carp. Let's see here. A lot of you guys saying skunked hard today on Kanawha. It's barley fishing. The fishing has been really tricky recently because of the change in weather, and there's been a lot of rain. The lakes are pulling down. So don't be discouraged if you're not catching fish. I'm having trouble on Beaver Lake and a lot of the other lakes I'm fishing too. I'm catching a lot of fish, but not the big females, stuff like that. So definitely not an easy time to catch them. J Pit Fishing says the bass right now, Greer's Ferry, are killing it. 6 hours, had over 50 bass. That's awesome. And Brad Dunn again says Tabrock's on fire. I need to get out there. Water temps are definitely warming up. Rusty says, I'm watching on the big screen. Easier to see and more graphic than on this phone. Plus makes Johnny look bigger. Lol. That's funny. A lot of the guys, where are the big females when all of the males are up shallow in 61-degree water temperature? On the points or just deeper on the bank? Great question, J Pit Fishing. So let me go over to Beaver Lake because I wanted to give that example. I kind of covered that earlier in the video, but I want to make sure I kind of make that clear. So, for example, I was fishing on Beaver Lake, and I was fishing in this creek right here. And I pulled into this creek, and I'm going to take the lake back a little bit so you can kind of see what this bank is looking like. And what's going on is I was catching fish like crazy this last weekend on these rock transitions where it transitioned from this slate rock to basically the pea gravel, where there's like big chunk rock to the flat nothing banks. Another example is like right over here where you have rock, steep rock, and it transitions to basically nothing. And I was catching a ton of fish on these areas. What's happening though is that all the fish I was catching were like 12 inches, or like the biggest fish I was catching was like a 2-pounder. And I tried fishing down the steeper parts of these banks, and a lot of times that's where these females would be sitting. But what happened is that these fish pulled off the bank, the big females, and they want to be like right here. They want to spawn in these little pockets and cuts, but they hadn't quite moved up yet because water temperatures were like 59 degrees, 60 degrees, so they were right there. Like the fish should be moving up to spawn, but the water was falling and it hadn't been warm enough for long enough for the fish to actually get on the beds. And so the female bass, again, I was seeing them underneath my boat in like 12, 13, 14 foot of water, and it's impossible almost to get those fish to bite because they're just kind of chilling and waiting. But then the cloud cover and the wind came in, and it started pushing some fish up shallower on these banks. You could start catching them here, and not just the male bass, but the female bass. And I caught like 25 fish on beaver last weekend, fishing similar areas like this. Caught some off like this boat ramp here where you got some chunk rock, and it looked like the perfect area when water temperatures are 59 degrees. This is a great staging area for those big females, but all the females were just sitting out here in like 12, 13 foot, suspended over 20 or 30. Let's see here. So hopefully that makes sense. It's just, again, wait for those good weather conditions, and then this time of year, honestly, I just wait till they stop spawning because I hate fishing around the spawn. I don't really like bed fishing that much, even though it's fun to watch them. I don't really like taking fish off the beds, and so I just wait till post spawn comes around because then the fishing is just easy and fun, at least in my opinion, and the summer fishing. Caleb Morgan says, would spot bass change any depth-wise or in certain areas rocks? So yeah, spotted bass in general, like on here on Beaver Lake, I'm gonna use Beaver Lake as an example just because I'm here. Beaver Lake, a lot of the spotted bass will sit out here kind of near the main lake, and I actually caught a ton of spotted bass. So last weekend I caught 5 fishing around this riprap right here, and this riprap's a lot steeper, it's a lot deeper, and it's right off the main lake. And in general, the spotted bass will sit a little bit deeper, and they'll spawn a little bit deeper than the largemouth. The largemouth will spawn like back in these flat, shallow pockets like in here, but those spotted bass will sit on a lot steeper banks out on the main lake. They may even spawn like out here on some of this steeper stuff here, or they'll spawn way off the shore. So like if you're fishing down this bank, the largemouth will spawn up here right on the bank. If this water was up, like assume this water's back up to like normal pool, the largemouth will spawn up here, but the spotted bass will spawn out here in 7 to 8 feet of water sometimes, especially when you have really clear lakes where you have really good visibility. Same thing with smallmouth. Smallmouth act the same way when it comes to that. Good question. After the spawn, do the females go back to the offshore ledges? On lakes like Pickwick, yes. On lakes like Eufaula, sometimes they'll just kind of chill and hang around up shallow. And like on a lake like Beaver, it kind of is a mixed bag. There's going to be some fish that just stay up shallow year round, and they'll basically just live up shallow. And they'll get in like wolf packs in the summertime after they spawn, like 5, 6, 7 fish, and they'll just roam the banks of these creeks looking for spawning bluegill and maybe shad spawn, stuff like that. And they'll just sit up here and be here all summer through July and August, even when water temperatures are like 85 to 90 degrees. But the majority of the fish, they do move off to the ledges, to the offshore structure out in the middle of the lake. Let's see here. Content is still good. Thank you, Topper. It's all good. Thumbs up. Okay, cool. I did see more people were coming on, so I just need to announce these better and people will join in. Also, I haven't been made that many videos lately, so maybe people are forgetting about me. See your great tips here. Your content is awesome. Okay, awesome. And Hartwell was awesome for the elites this past weekend. Yeah, Hartwell is really good fishery. They catch some really good. They're catching some really good largemouth to spawn in. JT saying, yeah, I saw that shirt, the flash shirt. It's funny. Trying to get to some of these comments. Let's see here. Caleb says, at fish the moment. Might be light tonight, but they know where the juice is. They will come back for all the informative videos. Awesome. Appreciate that, Caleb. What about post-front conditions? It's supposed to be 30 degrees Friday morning, and I think Saturday too. It's supposed to rain Saturday morning. Will the bass move back to 10, 15 feet of water? Potentially, yes, depending on how far along they are in the spawn. If they've just started to move to spawn and water temperatures just got into like 60, 62 degree range, let's say that the fish just started moving into these pockets to spawn. If they haven't laid their eggs yet, those fish, or if they haven't like fully committed to making their beds, the fish will pull back out here into 10, 15 feet of water and suspend. But if they've already started laying their eggs, or they've already started fanning off the beds and they're like really committed, those fish may just pull off the bed and just kind of cruise and roam out here in like 5, 6, 7 feet of water. They won't go all the way back. And then once that sun comes out and starts warming up the water, they'll push back up on the beds. And so they may not be locked on the bed if you get a cold front. If they're in the middle of the spawn, they may pull off the bank, 3, 4, 5 feet away from their beds. But in general, if they're already spawning, they'll just stick around in the beds most of the time. Tyler Hill Fishing said, the way you say the word feed just gets me hyped to go catch one. It's funny. Let's see here. JT on lockdown with all of the responses. Brandon, good to see you. Brandon McCade, or McDade. A lot of guys commenting. Let's see here. Sorry, guys, I'm just trying to read through these comments. JT says impact. I don't know what that's a reference to, but apparently I said the word impact. Trying to see all these questions. I'm not seeing too many questions, guys, with like at fish the moment and question marks at the end. So make sure you do that going forward if you do want me to answer a question. Maybe you're just not asking me that many questions, but I'm not really seeing it. Thanks again, Bruce and Keith, for the super chats, by the way. Topwater working yet? Yes. Topwater will work right now. That's Azen. Topwater will work pretty much anytime the water temperature gets about 55, 56 degrees. If y'all watch Jacob Wheeler, his YouTube channel, you can see he was crushing him on a frog over in North Carolina. And I've been catching fish on topwaters as well, even already, buzzbaits, stuff like that. So topwaters will definitely be working. Will smallmouth spawn and stage in the same areas as largemouth? They will, though not all the time. Sometimes they'll spawn in similar areas, but a lot of times, like out here in Beaver Lake, the smallmouth, like let's go way down the lake here. This is where a lot of the smallmouth are in Beaver Lake. They may actually start spawning. Like this is actually an area where a guy won. Where is it? Yeah, right here. This is an area where a guy won an FLW Tour event, and he was fishing off this point right here. And he was actually fishing for spawning smallmouth when water temperatures hit about 55 or 58, 59 degrees. And those smallmouth will spawn sooner than the largemouth, and they'll spawn out here a little bit deeper. And they'll spawn off this point you see right here, you can actually see these little like rocks and stuff out here. And these smallmouth will spawn around these isolated rocks. And if we take the lake back up, you can see that all of this is these deeper trees. You can see the trees are there, and these fish are basically spawning. They won't spawn up in these trees, but they'll spawn off the bank out here, and they'll actually spawn out in the deeper water out here, and they'll sit in 6 to 10 feet of water sometimes even and spawn. You catch them on shaky heads, dragging tubes, fishing drop shots, stuff like that. Roger says, Fish Mode, do you ever use auto chart on your hummingbird? Do you think it's beneficial? Roger, I have used the auto chart. It was super helpful on one of the little lakes that I fished. I ran out of recording time on it, so I had to either go buy a $150 chip to go continue to auto chart or just not worry about it. If I was fishing lakes around me consistently, and that's the main lakes I fished, that didn't have contour lines, I would definitely invest in the auto charts, like extra chip, and graph all the lakes, because it is super helpful on the one lake I did do it on. A lot of the other lakes that I fish, I've just found all the stuff already, so I don't really need the auto chart. But it's definitely helpful. It takes a lot of time graphing and driving around, but if you're going to fish those lakes consistently, like maybe 5-10 times a year for the next 10 years, definitely invest in it. It's definitely worth it. Let's see here. Got another question again from Tyler. Hopefully you heard that. Thomas says, you're great, man. Have a good night. Thank you for the info. Appreciate it, Thomas. JT says, got your back. Cam says, dang it, I gotta get out of here. Gonna have to rewatch the beginning. Awesome, man. Do you chase dirty water and lakes with rivers that make them up? Sometimes I do go up those dirty water areas, like on Beaver. It kind of depends. Like if I'm fishing on Beaver this time of year, I like to stay in the clear water because I find the bigger fish are a little bit easier to catch on the lower end from the winter time. So let's say from about from December through about mid-April. I like to fish the lower end of the lakes, but then as the later in the when it gets later in the year into the May through June or July, sometimes you can run up these rivers, like way up these rivers, especially if you get a lot of big rainstorms and find some current flowing, especially as the water warms up, and catch a bunch of good fish. But in general, if I'm gonna probably try to win a tournament or something, I'm gonna stay mid-lake to lower ends of the lake on a lot of these fisheries. On Beaver Lake, I fish mid-lake just because I think that's where the biggest concentration of bigger largemouth are. But um, yeah, I'll run up the rivers. Normally, the rivers is more of a numbers game where you'll catch a lot of fish, and it's really good when the fishing's really tough on the lower end where the clear water is. And so if the clear water bite is just dead and you can't catch them at all, I'll run up these dirty water areas, especially if there's some rain, which will create current. You can catch them on crankbaits, spinner baits, flipping all through the summer. And also, the river systems are really good in the fall because the bass will push up shallower quicker, especially right as those water temperatures start dropping. They'll push straight to the bank, making them way easier to catch. The GNT saying I was very energetic with my word impact earlier. Um, and Bruce Clayton says, this time of year, do you scan or just fish? I scan a ton this time of year. Um, a lot of times, what I'm trying to look for from scanning is on a lake like this. I'm actually going to be doing this in my sneaky spawning area video that I'm making soon. It's like my sneaky spawning area is what I call it. But basically, like let's say you go into this little pocket right here. If we look at this pocket right here, I actually found these on Google Earth, but you see these big rocks and boulders out here. If I was fishing this down on Beaver Lake this weekend, I would be fishing some of these underwater boulders that are maybe in 5-6 feet of water that you may not be able to see unless you actually have Google Earth and you can mark them, or if you side scan this area. And so what I do is I'll go to the lake, especially on a lake like, let's say, let me find, go over here. Say Lake Maumelle, which is over here in central Arkansas. If I go over here, sometimes you can go and you can scan the these backwaters back in here. I'm going to be using this spot later in the video, so hopefully not everyone thinks this is redundant, but let me go back in just a second and find this picture. What I could do is I could actually go in these areas, and I found this with Google Earth, but I'll actually scan some of these really flat pockets there in the backs of some of these areas on these dirtier water lakes or dirty sections of these lakes. And instead of just fishing the bank like everyone else, I'll look for these flat areas like this, and I'll look for stumps, like a stump, 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 stump. And I'll look for these areas. They're out in front of these spawning areas, and these areas are great for pre-spawn largemouth. So this time of year, if all the bass haven't moved up to spawn, you can find fish pre-spawn on these stumps, or you may be able to even find bass spawning on stumps like up on the flats. And those are areas that the bass like to spawn, and a lot of people don't look for. And so I will scan a lot this time of year, especially if I'm fishing tournaments, and I know everyone's just going to be beating the bank. Kind of look for those sneaky spawning areas. And I have time to answer a few more questions. I have to jump here to do something else. Um, Steven asks, how would you fish Bull Shoals Lake in Arkansas around this time of year? Steven, I actually covered that lake last week on my live stream, and so go check out that lake breakdown on my live stream last week, and you'll be good to go. What's your go-to bait for large, small jig, and weightless plastics? Caleb's asking. This time of year, I love to fish weightless like Cincos and like wacky rig worms. That's kind of my go-to. Roger says, thanks for answering my question. You're on the spot. Need to buy a chip. Awesome. Yeah, definitely going to be helpful there. That's Roger. And then Kyle, sorry, Roger, I feel like I answered with very low energy. You had a lot of emotion in your comment with all the caps, so sorry for responding low energy there. I'm getting a little bit tired after talking for an hour and 15 minutes, but thank you for all the support as always, Roger. A couple more here. Kyle Whitmer says, striking Thunder Cricket or the Jackhammer. I haven't fished either. They both look really expensive, and I don't want to buy either of those because it's a chatterbait or a vibrating jig, and it's $15 or $12, whatever. That's just ridiculous, in my opinion. So neither. Just I don't know. There's like the Elite chatterbait, which is like $8, which is still really good in my opinion, and it's half the price. Let's see here. And then Steven says he got the live stream. Tyler says, I'm from the Northwest Ohio, and the walleye are running in the rivers to spawn right now. Is it safe to say smallies will spawn in the same rivers generally? Yeah, they'll definitely spawn up there in the rivers for sure. Used to catch a lot of spawning smallmouth in the rivers when I was fishing in Wisconsin before the season opened up on the lakes. You could go to the rivers and catch them spawning. What's your go-to color wacky rig? Keith asks. I fish in the clear water. I'll fish a Okeechobee craw or a blue craw color, and then if I'm fishing a dirty water, I do black and blue with gold flake if I'm fishing dirty water wacky rigs. So anyways, that's all I have time for tonight, guys. But thank you so much for joining for the stream. We had 120 people on at the end consistently, so I'm glad some people got to join in. That's like half my normal stream numbers, so I'm going to have to figure out how to get that back up. But thank you for all of the regulars who are here supporting the channel, watching the videos. It really does mean a lot to me. And really excited to break down some more lake for you guys again next week. And if you do want to figure out my live stream schedule, I did post it on my website, fishthemoment.com. And I also have some more lake breakdowns, so map breakdowns where I can make maps of your lakes, coming to my website starting next week, April 15th on a Monday. So Monday, April 15th, I'll have 6 more of those available. Sorry for the limited demand. Again, working full time, so don't have a ton of time in my schedule to continue to make those. And I also do have some one-on-one video lessons. They're available for the rest of this month and into May, but those are selling out really quickly. So definitely go book one of those if you have an upcoming tournament, because those, I'm only offering 2 a week now, and those sell out really fast. I'm booked up for the next like 3 weeks on those. And I also have on-the-water fishing lessons for the Northwest Arkansas and Central Arkansas area. They're open to you guys if you want to come do those lessons. They're available in May and June right now, and I'll have them open the rest of the year. And so if you want to do some offshore ledge fishing, you want to learn how to find the subtle offshore spots like shell beds, stuff like that, the middle of May to the beginning of June is the best time to go out on lakes with me, and you can just private message me if you want to figure out what lakes would be good for that. Shoot me an email. The email's on my website, fishthemoment1@gmail.com, and we could talk about lakes that would be good to go out to figure out how to catch them offshore and how to find those like subtle offshore areas. So we can go out in your boat again, look at your electronics, all that stuff. So other than that, thanks again for tuning in for the live stream. Thanks for everyone who's commenting in the stream and everything, and for the cues for the channel. So I'll see y'all next week.